In our Conversations with Great Minds series, I'm really happy to have with us today Professor Anita Hill. She has a new book out. It's titled Believing, Our 30-Year Journey to End Gender Violence. It's extraordinary. Professor Hill, welcome to the program. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me on your program.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. It's an honor. If I could kind of start at the beginning, well, actually, I was going to start with asking you about class and your testimony, but your book starts out with your story of growing up in a very large family and your mother coming from a very large. Can you tell us a little bit about essentially where you came from and how you got to where you are as a law professor and you know, this short summary of the arc of your life, if you don't mind.
Well, I grew up on a subsistence farm in Oklahoma, in northeast Oklahoma. I went away to college to Oklahoma State University, just an hour or so from where I grew up, and then graduated from college and went to law school at Yale, which was, you know, miles away and in some ways worlds away from Oklahoma. You know, I think some of the most significant parts of what I realized when I start thinking about how I got to where I am today is really the ways that I had to adjust and adapt in my life to different locations and even change careers in a sense to get to where I am today and be able to address some of the what I think of as one of the most troubling and important problems in our society, and that's gender violence.
Yeah, and your book does a brilliant job of addressing it, and I want to dig into that. And speaking, you know, apropos of that, gender violence was inflicted on you by Clarence Thomas, and I'm curious about your how that experience of testifying, I mean, disrupted your life or changed your life. What, you know, looking back on it now, what have you learned from that, as well as how did that experience affect you?
Well, it affected me in that you know, there were threats to me after the hearing. There were threats to my life, to my job, to my family, to friends and their jobs. I mean, I look back now and think about really what a terrible time it was, and great uncertainty about what my future would be, and realize how many people, including my own family members and friends and colleagues, who were caught up in it, who shared that experience and much of that pain and uncertainty with me.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
But no, I would just say that fortunately, in 30 years of working through that period, as well as really committing myself to something bigger than even the 1991 hearings, has helped me to put all of that in perspective and to realize that I am not alone. Yeah,
absolutely. And in fact, in that context, Red Book conducted the first national survey of sexual harassment in 1976. I believe it was 1973 was the first year that women could get a credit card or get a mortgage in America without the signature of a man, a father or husband or brother, if I'm remembering correctly. What does that tell us about how recent this recognition of gender violence in the workplace, in the family, in relationships, right across the board is?
Well, one of the things that stands out to me is the fact that, you know, first of all, it was Red Book, a women's magazine, as they were called then, that did the survey. It was not our government. It was not, you know, one of our big research institutes or universities. It was a magazine that really devoted the time and effort into understanding the experiences of women in the workplace. And we remember that was a period in which women were going more into the workplace, were not being making decisions or were not limited to roles in the home, but were working outside of the home. And of course, this, you would think, chronicling their experience and measuring their experience would be a priority for everyone. But that was not the case. It certainly was not the case that the government put that as a priority. And we still don't have adequate information collected by the government about the impact of sexual harassment on individuals or on our entire nation. We do have more information, but we don't have all of the information.
You were being sexually harassed by Clarence Thomas in the 1980s, as I recall?
It was the early 80s.
Yeah. So was there, and I mean, this was just after Red Book just did this study, that it seemed like kind of a new thing, which is bizarre. I mean, even thinking about it in that context, how much of a cultural shift have we experienced from that point, that period of time till today? I know in your chapter on, are the millennials going to save us? The myth of the woke generation, I think, is the title of the chapter. You expressed some of that about that, but we've got this kind of arc here, this 40-year arc that you've been not just a witness to, but right in the middle of the maelstrom. What are your thoughts on how culture has changed or hasn't?
Right. I mean, when you positioned me in it, I was in school in the 70s, thinking about a career, and finally graduated from law school in 1980. And still, the issue of sexual harassment was not something that was part of a public discussion. So that when I experienced it, even though I was at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission for part of the time, the notion of sexual harassment as a violation of civil rights had been taken up in some court cases, but there were still these decisions out there that didn't quite understand the importance of it. The EEOC, under Eleanor Holmes Norton as chair, had put together regulations, but the enforcement of the issue was not robust. It wasn't one of those priority issues. And as a matter of fact, even after I took my first job in law teaching and was teaching employment discrimination law, in the course book that I used that was written by women, there was really like one short passage that included maybe 2 or 3 cases on sexual harassment in underemployment discrimination. So, it was not on the public landscape. And honestly, even by 1991, when I testified, there were people who said they still didn't recognize that sexual harassment was against the law, that the law had not caught up with with people, that they didn't even know that they had rights not to be sexually extorted or to have to work in a place that was riddled with harassment, and whether it's verbal or physical. So the law was out there, but it wasn't recognized and acknowledged, and there were very few processes in place throughout corporations to address it.
How much has the workplace changed? You talk about in your book about how people have reached out to you with a whole spectrum of gender violence issues, from incest and rape to workplace harassment, but specifically in this case about the workplace harassment, sexual harassment. Do you think we have really transformed that? Have we won that battle, or are we close to it?
No. Even as late as a couple of years ago, the EEOC did an investigation and they did a report and found that the problem is still rampant. That the number of claims has escalated in 1991, but the problem is still a large problem in our workplaces. When you look at the data, the most up-to-date data says that 50% of the workplace population of women, people who identify as women, have 50% has experienced sexual harassment. And so, and we also know that a large percent, maybe as much as 60% or even larger, will experience retaliation if they complain. But in fact, a minority of people who experience it ever complain.
What about your older brother, Albert, warning you not to drink when you went off to college? Isn't it startling that we accept this, the fact that this warning is given from brothers to sisters, is given to women when they go off to college, but not to men? Yes, well, it's startling because that there is a certain level of sexual assault against men that we don't talk about. Yeah, but
one in six men or boys will experience. I'm sorry?
No, I interrupted you. My apologies. I was just trying to illustrate how lopsided it is. Apparently, that this idea that, or the fact that women are being harassed in the workplace or could be raped on a college campus. And you're right. You're absolutely right. Men get assaulted too. I'm sorry. Finish your response.
Yeah, but let me just add to that. That is the common thinking, that we have to make sure that women protect themselves. And we put the responsibility for keeping safe on our daughters. And we don't put the responsibility on institutions where this is happening. One of the things that's really interesting now is the campus protests around the country. They typically are targeting fraternities where sexual assault has been known to happen on their campuses. But the important advancement, I think, is that this generation is understanding that the institutions, their universities, are protecting organizations like fraternities, as well as other organizations, from any accountability. And that's what those protests are about, and that's what's different. They're no longer accepting the idea that, well, if women don't drink the punch, that was what my brother said. He said, don't drink the punch because you have no idea how much alcohol is or whatever else is in it. That, they can't rely on not drinking the punch or, making sure that they're in their dorm rooms or apartments before it gets too late. So they are not buying into the notion that they have to protect themselves, that they're demanding that colleges and universities provide a safe environment for protecting everybody's right to have a college education without suffering sexual harassment and assault.
Do you think that seems to be changing? Is it not?
Well, I think that it's moving, but apparently students are still experiencing the problem.
Right.
There was, I keep referring to the different studies. The National Association of Science, Engineering, and Medicine did a study in 2018 that was released, and they looked at sexual harassment in academic settings in those discipline areas. And what they found was that the problem is still rampant. About
her new book, Believing, our 31-year journey to end gender violence. And Professor Hill, I'm curious your thoughts on, you are a law professor, and you worked with Clarence Thomas. What are your thoughts on him now?
I made a promise to myself, and actually have heard this question over and over. I don't study Clarence Thomas. I'm not objective. So I really don't study what he does on the court. There are plenty of people who follow the court. That's their job. And there are plenty of us who teach law who don't follow the Supreme Court, so I'm not alone in that. Mm-hmm. But I leave the evaluation of the way he has conducted himself on the court to those who follow it.
Okay, fair enough. I'm curious, the way that you were treated by the press back in 1991, and by the public, the threats that you received and things like that. How much of that, or how would you parse out what parts of those were reactions to your simply challenging a Republican or challenging the machine or the establishment, as it were? What parts were related to your race and what parts were related to your gender?
Wow, it's hard to unpack all of that. I think they're also interconnected.
Sure.
And it really is difficult to parse out which part was gender, which part was race, which part was just that I was bucking the tide and challenging the president of the United States and his nominee. Mm-hmm. But I can say that I'm absolutely convinced that all of those were factors. Yeah. In the way that I was treated. And I also think that just in terms of the press, I do think in the years since then that the press has come to understand this problem and has shed a lot of light and helped raise the public awareness by reporting on cases in the press, in cases that have been going on for years but never got the kind of exposure that they're getting today. So, but I think in 1991, most of the coverage of the hearing was about a political scandal and the political stakes. Very little was about the real life experiences of people who were victimized by sexual harassment. That didn't come until after the hearings. But the press was more likely to ask the question, what's the consequences of this hearing to Clarence Thomas and his career, and rarely ask what would be the consequences to me for having come forward. Which is and we now know that the consequences were really, really difficult and hurtful.
Yeah, very severe. We just have 30 seconds until we're going to hit a break here. When you saw Christine Blasey Ford come forward and testify, what did you think?
I was hoping that, in fact, that we could have a different process and a different outcome, quite frankly. But I thought that she was being truthful and that she was doing her duty. That is to bring relevant information about the character and fitness of an individual who was nominated to sit on the Supreme Court for a lifetime.
Yeah. Anita Hill, your book, Believing, is extraordinary. Your life, what a journey. Thank you so much for dropping by today and for writing this book as well. Thank you.
Thank you.